We have breaking news this morning out of The Hague. The International Court of Justice isn't throwing out a case accusing Israel of genocide in the current war against Hamas, but also stopped short of issuing a call for a total ceasefire.
The court issued several preliminary measures for Israel to follow, including doing everything they can to prevent widespread Palestinian deaths, as well as providing food, water, and medical supplies to Gaza. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has already dismissed any potential interference from the world's top court, saying, quote, "No one will stop us." Now, once a ruling from the International Court of Justice is issued, it is binding under international law, but there is no enforcement mechanism. Michael Link is a professor emeritus at Western University's Faculty of Law and former UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in the occupied Palestinian territory. Michael, thank you so much for joining us. So let's start with your reaction to the International Court ruling.
Well, this gave South Africa most, I think, of what it was looking for. The orders, as you have mentioned, required Israel to do everything possible within its powers not to engage in the killing of civilians, to allow humanitarian aid, not to press for the forced displacement of Palestinians, much of which, unfortunately, has already happened with respect to this, and that its orders are binding on Israel. It must be a huge disappointment to Israel. But as you point out, also, the court did not order a ceasefire in this case. And one might think that if one really wants to see a war of this scale come to an end, Israel may argue, we are doing everything within our power with respect to genocide, and we're going to continue to prosecute this war until our war aims are finished.
Now, it's also, there was a really lengthy preamble to this decision earlier today. Obviously, it was necessary to highlight how this ruling was all dissected. So do you agree then with how the decision here from the International Court was actually justified?
Sure. Look, let's think of this legally and politically. I've just explained to you what the court did legally, but politically, this has to be a huge slap in the face for Israel. The court made it clear that it was satisfied by the evidence and the arguments made by South Africa that there was the plausibility of genocidal acts having taken place in Gaza through Israel's conduct of the war, and it was also satisfied and made a point of noting statements they said could go to genocidal intent. In other words, dehumanizing statements made about Palestinians by among other people, the Israeli president and the Israeli Minister of Defense. This will present a huge political complication, I think, for Israel with respect to its continued support by nations in the global north.
And Michael, this was just an interim decision. How long will it take to get a final ruling?
Sure. Look, if we use the measuring stick of what's been going on in Myanmar as any indication, the Gambia brought allegations of genocide against Myanmar in December 2019. Provisional measures were ordered the next month in January 2020, 4 years ago, and they expect a trial on this in 2025. So there's a 5-year gap between this. We may expect anywhere between 3 and 5 years before this would actually reach the court in terms of being heard on its merits.
So in the interim here, this was, all, of course, sparked by a terrorist attack on October 7th by a group widely established as a terrorist organization here. Israel says it's defending itself against that. These are people, in many cases, Michael, who don't wear uniforms, etc. How is a country expected to defend itself on the one hand, while also on the other hand, are sort of trying to abide by some of these rules or rulings that have come down today?
Sure, but what the court said today is no more than what international law winds up requiring. No matter how audacious an attack has been made on you and your civilians, any measures you take in retaliation against that have to be within the strict guardrails of international humanitarian law. And that's what the Security Council has said. That's what the General Assembly has said with respect to the war in Gaza. And that's the theme that was echoed by the court today. It's saying that the measures taken by Israel are suggested to be overboard in terms of its reaction to what happened on the dreadful events of October 7th.
Yeah, and Michael, we know that even if it is, it comes down to the final ruling, Israel should do this, should do that. There's really no mechanism to enforce this international law. So what are the consequences at the end of the day?
Sure. Well, there is actually a mechanism to enforce this. You're right. The court doesn't have an army. It doesn't have police, but it has a Security Council. And the difficulty there always has been the role of the United States in giving a diplomatic shield to Israel. 3 times since October 7th, the United States has vetoed resolutions calling for a ceasefire. One may hope that there's going to be another resolution very soon at the Security Council that is going to be relying upon the decision today of the International Court of Justice, and that will put the United States in a very difficult position. It may say, without reference to this ruling, that say to Israel, time's up. We're going to have to end this and figure out some other way to deal with Hamas and try to reconstruct Gaza.
And Professor, also interestingly, the ICJ also called for the immediate release, unconditional release of all the hostages being held in Gaza by Hamas there. If that does happen, I mean, do you think, first of all, that it could happen? And if it does, do you think that may lead to Israel perhaps de-escalating more according to what's being looked for here?
A very good point. And of course, I want to make it clear that the taking of civilian hostages is a war crime under international law. Hamas didn't make a statement yesterday or the day before that it would abide by any ruling coming from the International Court of Justice. We'll have to see if they abide by that statement made by the ICJ. I suspect what's going to happen is going to be even more intensive negotiations involving Israel, the United States, Egypt, and Qatar over how to wind this up. And that may be, as I said, the court may give an extra impetus to the United States to find a pathway out of this.
All right. Michael Link, Professor Emeritus at Western University's Faculty of Law and former UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Palestine. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your thoughts.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.